Okay, welcome all. And I'm going to be covering this material overall in around 40 minutes. There are three topics that I'm going to cover. One, a very basic agenda in terms of the introduction, right? The introduction, there'll be a bit of a humble brag start about my own background. And it's important, I think, for all of you to sort of relate to the background more than anything else. So, pardon me if it sounds like a humble brag, but the idea of that is to really be able to say as to where the genesis of One Life Theory was. The second topic on the introduction is the 10 tenets, which act as sort of the basic foundational material of the One Life Theory as well as sort of any framework to life. I think a lot of you will be able to relate to a lot of the 10 tenets, even if not all the 10 tenets, at least six or seven of those will become pretty obvious. Then the five ways to live life, and this is where the genesis of One Life Theory comes, right? How it fits in into how you look at life. Section one will end with a poll. So I think by the time we get to the poll, it's usually around 20 25 minutes in. As much as I try to cover that, the first poll will give us some data on where people are in life. It's sort of an aggregate one, so you can certainly answer, and there's no individual sharing of information. At the end of 20 minutes, I think you would have gotten pretty good context on where One Life Theory fits. Then the second bucket is where we get into the seven-step framework itself. The seven-step framework, obviously, when a left-brain person sort of looks at any field, leave aside the field of happiness and human potential, there is going to be a lot of frameworking. There's going to be a lot of bullet pointing, and there's going to be just a lot of ability to put it out in concepts, right? So a bulk of this is actually around the seven-step framework. We will not be going in depth into each of the seven steps because that's almost impossible, even if you give me an hour. What I'll do is I'll try and give context of how we get to something called the One Life score. A One Life score is a score on a scale of 100 where you're going to be measuring how well you're living life, right? It's a very personal score, it's not a relative score. But at the same time, the One Life score can give you context on how you're living life. We'll cover in depth till the OneLife score. I'm obviously not going to be posting that during the chat. It has 100 questions, so you can't obviously answer during this session. And I'll also cover steps 5, 6, and 7 in a very brief manner. The idea is that this actually tends itself to a workshop format, which is what we want to get to after this quarter itself, where there'll be a 4 to 6 hour workshop anchored by Tara. And we want to be able to roll that out for companies, for individuals. So we will actually be doing that later part of this quarter. The last part to that is, of course, just to measure your own proxy for One Life score. It's called the happiness index. Again, so there'll be a poll which you answer real time live. So we will pause the second part of it there. The last 10 minutes is really a freewheeling conversation, and there, of course, would encourage all of you to sort of come on to video and ask any questions in terms of just the framework itself or how this might fit. And absolutely feel free to throw brickbats as well as bouquets in terms of the idea with all this is to get a lot of feedback. And even what Tara is working on the side is also to get a lot of feedback from people across social media. So the idea is we will also put in a feedback form and a feedback link and get more feedback. So that's sort of the way the next approximately 50 minutes will go. So without further ado, let me just get on to the introduction, right? So my own background, born in Chennai and had a very typical, extremely conservative, family life in terms of any Chennai boy. And during that, obviously, studies was super important. So this whole getting into some kind of a branded college started very early, especially if you're born in the late 70s or early 80s. It's all that you know. If you're born in Chennai, go to a good school, get a good grade. I did all of that and lived a very simple life. And of course, got into IIT Madras. I think I started experiencing failure. And if you sort of see the trend line across all of this, as much as a lot of LinkedIn and Facebook and everything else talks about all the successes, the things that are not mentioned there is all the failures that also happen, right? You go into IIT Madras as a very bright kid from school who's been a topper a good chunk of school life, and then you just encounter these 350 extremely smart kids from across the country. You're bound to suddenly be hit by the intellectual, capital there. And I think I pretty much failed in a subject for the first time in IIT Madras, right? So it's a very early taste of failure. Obviously, you'll think what's so big about failing in an institute, you stop. Once you're in a pool of 350 people and you fail, you start tasting failure for the first time. And that happened for me at IIT. Went on to Infosys, went on to IM Bangalore. I think those were fantastic 4 years of my life. This was now seems like aeons ago. This was at the start of the decade, the last decade, so 2000 to 2002 and 2002 to 2004. And for me, those 4 years at least made me a lot more confident compared to IIT Madras, where I don't think I could speak one sentence in English properly, because obviously Chennai and Tamil were just pretty much home. Then went on to Cognizant, where I learned the enterprise world and moved from coding on to business. And then life started, which is fall in love, get married, have a kid, and then sometime in 2012 decided to pursue the first sort of path, which was very different. Again, in Cognizant, I had experienced a bunch of failures in terms of just being in the first 3 years really on the ascent, and then the last year, I just didn't know what on earth I was doing. Every point in life, I think it was extremely important to get that one failure to give me and give myself a kick to actually get into the next journey, right? I don't think if I had not had that failure in Cognizant, I don't think I would have moved, right? I could have just spent the next 10 years in Cognizant. So moved to Yahoo, which is where my heart was in terms of the internet, and did again, it was a fantastic experience in Yahoo, learning the consumer internet, working with users, building products. Those 4 years, this was 2008 to 2012. And at the end of that, I think I was making far more presentations than products. And it, I think, got to me. And that's when I realized that I need to be doing something else. Again, I think Yahoo, the first 3 years, got Superstar Award, from the CEO globally, went to San Francisco to collect the award. Even in Cognizant, I'd gone, to make a presentation to the CEO, then CEO Francisco de Souza. And having seen those highs and lows was, I think, a big part of just the way I've been made, right? So then started Urban Ladder at 2012, and I don't think I would have started Urban Ladder if I was, in a very good place in Yahoo forever, right? Because Yahoo was phenomenal, and I had some great experiences in Yahoo. So if not for the failure in Yahoo, I don't think I would have sort of even had that energy to go and do something like Urban Ladder. During Urban Ladder, of course, the first 2, 3, 4 years, all up, raising a bunch of venture capital, in the press, in the news, built a team. A bunch of the team members are all doing phenomenal things today. I think that whole experience was fantastic. Even doing something entrepreneurial for someone of my background was something that's completely different, right? Got all the different awards, was on Times, was on magazine, Forbes cover. So all the pluses, but at the same time, on the personal side, I don't think my marriage was going anywhere, and I think we had been completely disconnected from one another. And two, I think even the Urban Ladder journey was so filled with ups and downs, that there were so many challenges that were also there on the professional side. Again, to the world, you're 40 under 40, you would be wondering what, have a wife, have a kid, what's wrong. But I think around 2016 end, when everything sort of came falling down, I was very deeply considering moving out and doing something completely different from professional side. And I had just signed my divorce papers in August 2016. So I think the whole of the 40 years of my life between 1978 and 2000, and 2018, if you look at it, I think it was just success, failure, every part of it. And if you see the tenets, you will see that reflect on the way I had sort of drafted the tenets, right? Now, for me, again, between 2016 and today, the last 5, 6 years, I think it's been about finding a new, sort of a venture and a new place where I can give my heart and soul. And I think Antler, thankfully, as well as One Life Theory and spreading One Life has been that on the professional side. It's been about finding love again, having dated, parted, and, done a variety of things in 2017, which I consider my transition year, my growing up year. I was a complete teetotaler. I just didn't like partying. I just was extremely, outside of Urban Ladder, was very close circle, didn't have too many friends. To actually, sort of connecting with so many people, becoming extremely social, becoming extremely extroverted. I think I literally swung from one side to another. Also started traveling a lot, did a lot of solo travel. That whole experience between 2016 and 2018, and somewhere I would say, after having stretched the rubber band from this extreme to that extreme, I think 2018 onwards has been about finding some level of a midpoint, which is very different from where I was, right? So, having gone through all of those experiences across the 40 years of life, and yeah, Rajiv Reborn, I don't know Karan, but I guess it is. And if you talk to all the people that know me from Herbal Ladder days or my college friends, I think that's pretty much what they will say. It's been quite a journey, right? And uh, as is sort of the custom with anyone who's left brain or has an engineering and an MBA degree, putting a framework around all this to actually spread this and disseminate this across a wide variety of people is what One Life Theory is about, right? Which is to say, hey, what is that context? So it was not that I lived as per this as much as I figured that maybe there is a process to the madness in terms of becoming from one person to another. So the whole idea of sharing this is obviously to say I'm sure all of you are at different ages, different geographies, different kinds of successes and failures on the professional side, on the personal side. But I can tell you one thing. I think the way the framework is designed is at least some part of it is applicable, and there'll be some aha through the next 45 minutes, and that's a promise from me to you. So let me now move on to sort of my inspirations, right? I think I'm not too religious, at least at this point in my time. I've been very religious as a kid, but I think there's a lot of wisdom in across a variety of people. And for me, I think in 2016, the first person, at least he's very popular in the startup world, and today probably in the rest of the world also, is Naval Ravikant, right? I think a lot of his philosophy on Twitter, a lot of his podcasts, I think have been super inspirational. As much as many of you might have a love or hate relationship with the other people on this particular slide, there's been a lot of things that I've at least learned. And one of my fundamental philosophies is I don't think any one human being is bad or good. There are good parts and there are bad parts. If you look at the good parts of each of the folks on the or each of the books of wisdom or works of spiritual relevance, there's a lot to learn, and that's pretty much the way I at least operate. So there's a lot to learn from Sadhguru, there's a lot to learn from Stoicism, Bhagavad Gita, philosophy, Chinese philosophy. So I wouldn't call myself an expert on any of it, but at the same time, I would say I have a lot of learnings from each of this that have gone into making One Life Theory, and it's a continuous moving work of I would say a mix of science and a mix of art. So it will continue to have more and more of different kinds of philosophies. I'll answer the questions in just a bit as I try to get to the actual context. So. Uh, Confidence boosting journey of 2004, readers rediscovery journey of 2017. Yeah, it's a very fair question, and I think I would say the last 5 years have sort of been the most transitional. I had a great set of experiences, but within a cocoon in the 2002 to 2004 time period, and in the 2004 to 2012 time period, it feels like I've sort of broken out of the cocoon into 2017, 2018, and I would say these experiences are far more enriching that way. Okay, so now let's get to the framework itself, right? Which is, if you see the framework, the way the 7 steps come out is the 7 steps depend on the 5 stages of life, and the 5 stages of life, in essence, take off from the 10 tenets. So I'm going to quickly run through these 10 tenets so that by the half-hour mark, we are done through the first section. These are pretty universal. This is, whether you believe in the one life theory or not, whether you believe in any particular theory or not, I think you will largely be able to relate to a lot of these tenets, right? And that's how these tenets have been designed. First, the universe is infinite, and this sounds like quite obvious in terms of space, in terms of time, in terms of options, in terms of people. We all think that it's that one job that we have, or that one city that we are, or the one kind of people, or the one community that we are part of. That's our universe. But if you actually see the universe, and travel is the best way to actually make this so profound. You see that there are so many things happening across the world. You go to a different country, you go to a Japan, I don't think they have any clue of the startup ecosystem here, or the prime minister of this country, or what this country's people eat. And Japan has probably millions of people. You go to Western Europe, you go to the US, I don't think some and people there are living a happy life somewhere in Texas, and I'm sure it's vice versa. The Texas person might consider that someone living in Delhi might have a great and happy life, and he or she has no idea of US politics or US jobs and stuff. So the universe is so vast in terms of just the earth as well as in terms of time. that we are nothing but a firefly, right? Our own existence for 80 years, which is so important compared to the 13.8 billion years that the universe has been live, is so small in, in absolute relevance as well as relative relevance, right? So we make this about ourselves, which is important because the second point is exactly that your time in life is finite, right? It's going to end in 80 years. And if you're already 25 or 30 or 35 or 40, as is the audience on this call, you don't have too much time left, which is next 40 years. And if you look at it, that's maybe 2000 weeks, right? It's not a whole lot of time. So living it up across all aspects of life, whether that's your personal health, because as you age, that becomes worse, whether it's your relationships, whether it's a romance, whether it's romantic relationship, your kid, or friends and family around you, whether it's work, which is an important part of what we do, it is to use the muscle, which is the most important muscle for all of us, or whether it's fun and having fun. On all aspects of life, living it up is extremely important because your time is finite and all of what you know is only your life. You don't understand or appreciate. I mean, you can empathize with others' life, but all that you experience, all that you see life is only your life, right? So, and you don't have past memories of past life as much as there are ways that people say that you can go back, but there is no conscious way to actually go back and understand or observe a past life or to be able to predict a future life, which is my third point, which is only the present moment, even within your life, is true. If anything could have happened in the last 43 years of my life, they're all memories, some of it good memories as nostalgia, some of it bad memories. None of that is relevant because the only moment that is true is this particular moment. What I do and my entire experience of life is how I am at this particular point in time and this moment, right? Of course, it's a bunch of brain chemicals. Of course, it's a variety of situations in terms of where I am at this point in time. But just worrying about the past or imagining a future or worrying about the future are both irrelevant because nothing that you can do which changes the past or predicts the future. For example, 1.5 years back, you could have had whatever plans, but when COVID hit, I don't think any plan, was worth it, right? So this is extremely critical that the present moment is the only truth. So life comes to this, which is if every present moment and every activity you do in a present moment, you're able to love it, then your life is set, right? And what is love? It could be about a particular exercise you do that you have to love. It could be about a particular person you are with. It could be about a particular job. If you love this present moment, then your life is set because there is nothing about the past, there's nothing about the future. You are just loving what you are doing in that particular moment. Now, with love comes successes and failures. As much as a lot of people talk about happiness, you have to understand that when you love something or when you love a moment and when you throw yourself with complete full intent, you're going to have success sometimes, you're going to have failure sometimes, right? Despite your best effort, which means that happiness and joy is not the only thing that you can experience. You will experience failure, you will experience loss, heartaches, and that comes with love. There's nothing that you can do about it, right? And if you don't love a particular moment and if you're just around, experiencing the moment without full love, you're probably not having the best moment or you're not going deep enough into that moment, right? So with love comes successes and failures. Dealing with both of them with equanimity is key, right? Which is, and equanimity is not to not react. Equanimity is not to say that, hey, I will, be happy with the success and I will just ignore the failure. Actually, it's not that. Equanimity is just that you deal with both of it the way you feel is right. That you deal with both of it in the way you want to cope up with. Someone might have an extremely high success. Uh, they might, have an extremely positive way to celebrate success. Someone might have an extremely negative way to celebrate, sort of uh, at least deal with failures, right? The whole point of this too shall pass as a phrase, I sort of struck the TOO and put two, is if you're having a great time today, assume this too shall pass. If you're having a bad time today, assume this too shall pass. And the whole point of equanimity is none of this is persistent. So you would rather deal with equanimity so that the highs, you enjoy it, you celebrate it, but you don't get it into your head that life is only going to be that. And so is are the bad moments. If you are in down in the dumps, if you're in a really bad time, assume that it can only get better from here on, right? So giving too much importance to both of those end, emotions is what has to be avoided, and that's what the word equanimity is. Now, How do we deal with this with equanimity is because the most powerful human organ is the brain, right? Is the mind that we are extremely capable. And the biggest difference between us and other animals is actually this brain and this mind. The reason why we are so evolved is, there's enough and more research and science that talks about how the humans are most evolved. And of course, there are conditions and there are people, whose minds are not operating at the right amount of depth or intelligence or situations, and the brain chemicals are not cooperating. Of course, for those people it is important to take help. It is important to take, in some cases it might be medication, it might be help. But in cases, in a large number of cases, the mind is our most important tool, and you've seen enough and more examples when the mind has been put to great use. Humans have achieved the most impossible things. um, this is the only truth which is moving forward because of the theory of evolution, the theory of the survival of fittest. If you don't move forward, if you think that you can be at the same point in time, you're only going to go back, right? And somewhere the reason why you're part of evolution, you can't sort of knock off evolution, or you can't move away from evolution, is we are part of that race of humans. We are part of this society, which essentially means that if you don't move forward, you're going to go back. So moving forward is the only option, and that's extremely true across a variety of aspects of life. That's whether that's health, whether that's relationships, whether that's work, whether that's money, whether that's fun. If you do not move forward, you're going to be set back. When you move forward, society has a lot of different institutions by which it expects you to move forward, right? Whether that's country, the nation state, whether that's religion, whether that's different beliefs, whether that's all the law and order, whether that's institutions like marriage, corporations. Each of these over the tens and hundreds of years has have now quote unquote rules that are all stories that humans have told each other. We are evolved animals. That's all we are. Everything else is a story that we have created to help ourselves live in a society in a very orderly way. Each of these does a particular job. Don't get me wrong, but all of these are institutions which are defined and drawn out by people like you and me, right, at some past point in time. So everything, including all these institutions, as well as this one life theory, as well as any story that we tell ourselves, is just a story. We all want to live by stories, because the biggest difference between humans and animals, again, is that ability to tell stories, ability to tell very rich stories that people believe in billions, right? So everything is a story, and this is where till point 8, I think a lot of people are able to intuitively get. It's in points 9 and maybe point 10 where people start diverging, right? But everything in this world which pulls all of us together is a story. The last one is live your story without judging others. And this is again extremely important in this world of social media, in this world where people pass judgment so soon. It is, everyone's story is important to themselves, but at the same time we are very quick to judge others' stories, whether that's based on caste, whether that's based on religion, whether that's based on sex or workplace, or a different city or a different country. We just very quickly judge others' stories. If you can live your story without judging others, and it's easier said than done, I know, then you're living a true life, whether that's anchored on any particular aspect or not, but at least you're living a life, and your only duty really here is to make sure that you're not harming other human beings in the process of living the life, right? So if you can live the life, and the more you can do it without judging other stories, I think you're doing a fabulous job. Those are the 10 tenets. And for me, I think one of the biggest quotes that has been extremely helpful to live this life, and even to make that shift at 38 as I made, is this particular quote. And I will say it, this is a Confucius quote: everyone has two lives, and the second one starts when we realize we only have one, right? And for me, somewhere in that 2016, 2017 time period, I came across this quote in a podcast by Naval Ravikant, and it stuck me so hard that, uh, it's very easy to say that this is a life and this is the only way to live. But the moment you actually realize that there is no one set way, there is no one set story, you can change your story any point in time, then it just is so liberating that you actually start a new life. And the reason why the term one life came is actually from this particular quote, right? To say that your one life starts when you realize that you can make a big change to wherever and however you're living across any aspect of life. um, I know there's a bunch of questions which I have to answer. One who's not, yeah. Yeah, there are profound statements being put on the chat window. I'm gonna, it's for all of you to read. I know we have hit the halfway mark, but I'll quickly run through the second part of the introduction phase, which is the 5 ways to live life. And this is something that I think, is where you probably can start slotting yourself. And at the end of these 5 ways, I'm going to sort of pose a question for all of you to answer. Okay, so two by two. I know non-MBAs hate two by twos, but I had to do a two by two to make sure you're slotted somewhere. Uh, in terms of the two axes here, the right axis is pleasures and the top axis is purpose, right? A lot of a lot of life you can live just by maximizing on pleasure. A lot of life you can also live just by maximizing on purpose. Of course, people don't maybe even look at life in all of these two axes, but I have found looking at life across these two axes as the most profound way to be able to take a call on what and how you should live, right? So if you look at, the left extreme, which is what I call monk life, that is lowest on pleasures and lowest on purpose. You can be nomadic, you have no particular purpose in this world, you're sort of living, it could be because of spiritual reasons, but you've sort of taken a very desireless approach to life. Desireless in terms of purpose, desireless in terms of pleasures, right? And when you look at life in that front, you actually probably live the most peaceful life, right? Because you have no desires, so you have nothing, no stress and no pressures. You have no specific purpose against which you're sort of, working, which means that again you're sort of in a very, very peaceful, state. So that is what I call monk life. It's very difficult for humans like us, specifically people of this particular, who are here on this call, to live a monk life, because that means by inherent essence that you have sort of left off all of your desires. You could do that at 60, you could do that at 40 theoretically too, but this is sort of counter to one life theory, which is why it's on the polar opposite end of where one life sits. Because you've sort of given up all pleasures, and one life says you have one life to live. Why would you live up, or why would you give up on anything, right? That's why it's on the polar opposite. So let's assume for a moment that none of you are living the monk life, none of you want to live the monk life if you're on this call. The second one, which is on the right extreme, is what I call the bohemian life. The bohemian life maximizes on pleasures, cares two hoots about purpose, right? Which essentially means either you have the money and or the wherewithal to just go around and experience life the way you want it, right? These are people who again could be nomadic or hippie-ish. These are people who are, typically travel is a big part of these people's lives. It could also be because you've made enough money, either from your past lives or your past relatives or in your current life, that you care two hoots about any kind of purpose. You just want to live the rest of your life enjoying life. It could be experiences, it could be materialistic stuff, but at the end of the day, that's what the bohemian life is. Maximize on pleasures, care two hoots about purpose. The polar opposite of the bohemian life, which is number three, is the missionary life. Missionary life does not mean Mother Teresa. Missionary life could be startup founders. Missionary life could be someone who's so obsessed with the purpose of what they're creating, how they're impacting the world, that that is their only focus. Everything else pales in comparison, right? A lot of founders, as I said, specifically venture-backed founders, live here. A lot of people that you encounter who are on social missions, a lot of people who you encounter building stuff, they all live here. Their primary purpose and of life is defined by what their primary mission is. The fourth one is a centered life, which essentially says that you're balancing out on pleasures, you're balancing out on purpose, right? A lot of humans live here because, the one, two, and three are by inherent nature the extremes, which by inherent, because of laws of numbers, means that there are much smaller set of people who live there. The most number of people live in centered life. The biggest problem is a lot of people live in centered life not by choice. They live by default. They live out of misery. They live out of not having any other options, right? They want to sort of go off in some direction and they are not able to. They're not able to either because they don't have the wherewithal or they don't have the ability to do, right? So I would say 85-90% of the world lives in the center. For me personally, the joy of creating one life is to say, in any and every aspect of life, it is possible to take away from the center and move towards the extreme, but move towards a positive extreme on both. Uh, I don't think personally fully I'm yet there, but I think if you can maximize life both on pleasures as well as purpose, you're living the one life, right? So everything that you do in terms of one life and the whole of the framework is to see whether you're living towards the maximization of your potential, towards your purpose, you're living towards the maximization of pleasures. It is also possible that at one point in time you are in a particular circle, and at a different point in time you are in a different circle on the same axis, right? And that's absolutely a fair way to live. But as long as you can make a conscious choice, then that's great. If you're living in a particular aspect here unconsciously, then you have a particular, you have a big problem. I'm going to pause here. You can open up for any questions. And the idea obviously is move from centered life to one of these three extremes, ideally the 0 5 extreme. But even if not the fifth extreme, go towards extreme 3 or extreme 2, right? That's sort of what One Life Theory is about. So the idea of One Life Theory is to help a billion people live their one life. I think by the time my time on this earth has ended, I do hope that we can move towards actually helping a billion people live their one life. I do very strongly believe that it's extremely possible to live and move towards having more of humanity live on the right extreme. And of course, the way we want to do it right now, the V equal to 5 6 hours of mine and 20 30 hours of Tara. So that's the only two of us who are doing anything with respect to one life. But the idea with this is to sort of, and Tara, who's also on the call, the idea for her is to sort of build this out more as an institution to actually impact people across a variety of things. And I'll talk about the plans towards the end of the call at 6 p.m. Do it in a way that we can actually make change, empower people. We are always authentic in whatever we put out, and hopefully, we are also more fun than just presentations. Okay, so I'm going to pause here. I'm going to ask all of you to sort of use this link. I'm going to put this link on the chat window. I'm going to stop share. I'm going to put this link on the chat window. What will be useful is if all of you take this poll. If you can click the link, if you can in the next 2 minutes answer, it will be extremely useful to get some level of a trend line on where all of you are. There are only two questions, so it shouldn't take more than 2 minutes. I hope you're answering. Let me open the form. Okay, I have touched 10 responses. Okay, 14. Four more people. Okay, 16. So let me get a quick summary of responses. Okay, so poll responses, 50% of you are living the centered life, right? Actually, it's increased to 55% of you are living the centered life. Usually, in any poll, the last time we did it, I think around 70% came as centered life. I know a bunch of founders from the Antler program are on the call, so which means that 40% of you are living the missionary life. It's a quite a high number. It's a very skewed audience today. In a regular audience, that number is usually around 20%. Missionary life means that obviously you are spending a lot more time at work. And because I can see a bunch of founders and a bunch of Antler folks, I can imagine why the missionary number is much higher. um, Only 6% is living the one life, right? And obviously that is of concern, because if you can live at any, and this is the thing, right? Obviously, theoretically, it sounds like at one point in time you can either live the missionary life or the bohemian life. It's going to be very difficult to live the one life. But the whole point of all of these frameworks is to say, hey, can more and more people consciously move towards the right hand extreme, so that at any one point in time they are both maximized at work as well as maximized on pleasures, right? It doesn't mean that in a particular week you'll do it, and I'll come to that. But zero obviously are living the monk life, zero are living the bohemian life. Okay, that's fair. Given a choice, what are the five, what are the ways in which you would want to live? uh, Funnily, 13% have said centered life, but 80% have said one life. And the whole point of all of this, and I always get a good 80% to justify why I'm doing this call. So 80% have said they want to live the one life. So let me now get back to the presentation. Any questions at this point in time? Happy to answer till now. Um, I will do the intro slide mapped on purpose and pleasure, year wise. Okay, that's going to take a lot of time. Which one will be result oriented, more missionary life or one life? I strongly believe that if your life is for you to live and you're not getting any younger, which means that I would go so far as to say, if you have to maximize your own life, you have to live the one life, not just the missionary life. It is possible that you create a lot more impact through the missionary life for others, but your own life is not living to its full potential. And that's the reason why I strongly believe it has to be on the one life axis rather than just on the missionary axis. Nothing against people who are taking that call. It's just that I do believe it's important. Isn't this somewhat? Yes, it is related to Ikigai. You will actually see one of the steps in the seven-step process actually taken off from Ikigai. It is a derivation of Ikigai in a slightly different way, but yes, it is one of the steps is based on the Ikigai framework. So far, real life map has been a scatter plot across all four quadrants, and that happens. It does go across these based on different phases of life. What did you do to stop judging folk situations over time, considering your conventional upbringing and background? Probably the toughest journey I've done is to make a move on this. I think it started with judging myself lesser. At least you are selfish enough to say that, okay, let me first judge myself lesser, and then maybe by extension, I will judge others lesser. And I think that's how my journey started in 2017-18. I literally wrote down as to all the things I used to do, and I put an opposite, and I did the 10 things that were opposite. And it's called stretching the rubber band, right, Nandini, in terms of to say that, okay, I'm not going to make a step by step move to the center. I have to extend myself to the other side and then come to the center, right? So I've always seen people make the transition to center on some of these very difficult aspects by going to the extreme and then coming back to the center rather than step by step coming to the center. So I think it started with judging myself lesser, and I was selfish enough to do that first. Okay, I think yeah. So given we have exactly 20 minutes left, I'm gonna get to the step two of the presentation. I know I'm 10 minutes behind, but I think we'll try and make up for the time. Okay, so let me get back to presentation mode. Okay, so part two, the seven step, OLT is what I'll use going forward just to save time. OLT framework. So the first step of this, which a bunch of you who are part of the Antler program would have come across, is to first understand what your personality type is as well as what the patterns of your life have been, right? There's a particular reason why you're at 30 or 40. You've done a variety of experiences, you've had a variety of beliefs, of values. So some things are obviously going to continue to be important to you. It is important to understand, first of all, as to what's your foundational personality type. At a very high level, there are four foundational personalities. Each of you individually could be one predominant personality as well as one secondary personality. At a very high level, some people fall into the thinker bucket, which means that they are very strong thinkers, get overly cautious, but they are, very bullet pointed in the way they come at things. They're very logical, very rational. The feeler is the person who is extremely emotional at stuff. They're very people centric. They love being around people. Doesn't mean that they have to be extroverted. They just love interactions with people. They act a lot on feelings, which also means that they could be unstructured in the way they come at things. Thinker and feeler are generally opposite, but I have seen enough people who have both of these attributes as primary and secondary. Then intuitor and sensor are again polar opposites. I have seen very few human beings who are both intuitor and sensor. It usually the combinations that work are intuitor feeler, intuitor thinker, or sensor thinker, sensor feeler, right? Intuitors are big, visionaries at some level. They're able to have the power of imagination. They're able to uh, not just evangelize things, but they're also able to paint visions of the future which others can't see, right? Of course, the problem with that is they're long on vision, short on action, and they are irritated and they get very irritated with details. The sensor, on the other hand, is all about action bias, is all about doing stuff, is all about results, is all about the here and now, which essentially means that they also, without taking a step back, can have impact on which direction things are moving, right? Because they are extremely impatient for results. Personally, I fall into an intuitor comma thinker. That's my predominant personalities. And I think with years of experience and with years of, other kinds of aspects, you're also able to build the other muscles which are not your strong point, which means that on the work front, I'm also able to build the muscle of being a feeler and being very employee friendly or employee centric. And I'm also able to, in context, push myself on being a sensor, right? For example, in Antler, we've done so many things in such a short span of time. I don't think any VC or any company would have done so many things in just 18 months, right? So if you work consciously on things which are not your natural strengths, it is possible to be able to move on certain things. The first step is actually also about identifying past patterns in terms of what are the things across your different phases of life that you've experienced. Which are the things, what are the things you like, what are the things you don't like, right? So that's step one of the One Life Theory framework. As I already mentioned, I'm only going to talk through in detail steps 1 to 4. I'm not going to talk in detail about steps 5, 6, 7, but I will mention it. So this is where you start, right? You start with the basics of who you are. The personality assessment, unfortunately, there isn't too many free ways to do this. The MBTI framework is actually based on this. The MBTI framework is different. This is the more core Carl Jung framework on which the personality is measured on. That's step one. Step two is what I call what are your regrets that you never want when you die, right? And this is a pretty famous source of work. I think there's a book also that's written. There's a nurse that was in palliative care who has talked to thousands of people in their deathbed, right? And she actually came up with these top 5 regrets of the dying and actually patterned it out, right? Unfortunately for us, we would never know this until we hit our deathbed, right? So we have to take someone else's word on it. The only thing we can add is what are the things and the regrets that we don't want ever in our life, right? And I'll sort of mention 2 3 which I think are important personally for me. For example, the top 5 regrets of the dying. One, the biggest one is I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not what others expected of me. This has come out as the number one regret for thousands of people, right? Second, all the missionaries out here, the biggest regret is I wish I hadn't worked so hard. People, literally every single one. You saw the latest case of this person who retired from F1. I think he talks a lot about this, right? He said just says I wish I hadn't worked so hard in his own ways. The third one is probably for all the uh, love letters and feelings that I've never expressed in college. I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. It could be to your parents, it could be to your kid, it could be the time you just didn't say the words that you wanted to say, and that person is probably no longer there. Fourth, I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends and by extension, family. I think that has come out as a very important thing. And the fifth one, which I read slightly differently, this is the phrase which is used in the book. I wish I had let myself be happier. For me, what that means is I wish I had let myself be happier and be less stressed, right? Because that's for me the way it was. So these five are the regrets of pretty much a lot of people. It is fine that you, as a personality type, would never have to. Maybe you're bound to be quote unquote a workaholic. A workaholic is a bad word. It's no different from an alcoholic. You don't want any holic, which means that you're addicted to something beyond what you should be. But at the same time, you could have your own top 3 regrets. For me personally, beyond all this would be one, if I didn't spend, it's an extension of 4, which is if I didn't spend time with Griya, my daughter, during her growing years. It would be traveling the world. If I didn't travel the world, I probably would have a regret. 3 for me is actually a bit of an opposite of 2. Is if I didn't leave a legacy in terms of impact, either as institutions, whether that was the Urban Ladder journey or whether that's the Antler journey or whether that's the One Life Theory journey, it's also about creating impact and creating and living a legacy beyond my time, right? I would probably have a huge regret, and I've been wired that way from very early on to not have that kind of an impact on society, right? So I think those are the for me the 3 biggest regrets if I didn't, and of course I also share some of these other regrets too. It is important for each of you to write what might be your regrets, because as you age, it only gets tougher. If you're going to have that regret, to be able to satisfy that, you write down the regrets and you should live a life which never has to get to those regrets. And this regret minimization framework, I think the phrase was first used by Jeff Bezos on a very work front, but is true of across all of these. That's step 2, regret minimization. Step 3 is potential maximization, right? Which is identifying your potential. And this is across, and this is the step that takes off on the Ikigai framework. And really, the idea with this is to understand three, four things. One, what are you good at? What are you good at? It could be, and this exercise is done way better on the professional side, but funnily, and I've done this for a variety of people, it is actually done well even on the personal side, right? In terms of what you're good at and what you are successful at. It's not just on the professional side. You can do two mini exercises, divide this into professional and personal, and then do this. What are you good at is the first one. Second is what were you successful at? And it could be that one and two match, it could be that one and two are slightly different. Third is what would you like to be mentioned in your eulogy, right? What are the words that you want to be associated with? And three will usually define what are the other things, in terms of whether you're a good father or a good spouse or a loving spouse or a good friend or a wanderlust or a nice guy or a humorous guy or a nice girl or a fashionable girl or a fashionable guy, whatever it is, right, is important to you. I think it's important to call out. It could be something that might be quote unquote trivial to someone else, but whatever is important for you, list down the top 5, 10 words that want to be associated against you. um, who are your role models? Four is actually a very interesting thing, very interesting exercise. And personally, when I did this exercise, I realized that for me, there are three fields that become extremely important as role models. One is the field of business. I've always been sort of amazed by the likes of Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg, and those have been huge inspirations for me. I used to code a lot as an engineer in my early days, so that was a huge inspiration, Bill Gates and stuff. But over the years, second and third is one, the field of arts and music and everything around storytelling. I think people buy stories, as I said at the start, and the ability to create stories in the form of any kind of art was pretty big for me. And third is philosophy, right? Anyone who's sort of been able to distill life's learnings have been big inspirations personally for me. Whoever are your role models, it is also important to write out why they are your role models, right? So that you get more understanding of who you want to be like. The last one is what's stopping you from achieving your potential. The Ikigai framework never lists down your biggest hurdles, right? It is extremely important when you talk about what are the things you don't want to do, or what are the things that you're not suited to do, or what are the potential pitfalls for success in life. You're going to very honestly list down the things that are pulling you back from achieving your potential. And that's a big part of this exercise. So the moment you list down this five, and step three is a very involved step, while step one is involved to the extent that you have to understand your personality. Step two is the most straightforward step across all of the 7 steps. Step three is probably one of the most detailed steps in the framework. The idea with step three is when you get to step five, where you're going to be writing out how your current chapter of life should be, both on personal and professional, you at least by then have understood as to what are the things that who were you, what are the things you don't want to be, which is the regrets, and who are you in terms of your potential and your strengths, right? These three act as huge inputs into the rest of the steps. And of course, the idea today is to not get into the next level detail, but to just leave you with what are the exercises that you could do, even of your own will, to get to what you should be doing at this particular point in time. Okay, step four, the last step where I'm going to be detailed today is the one life score itself, right? Step four, the any and every life can be split into these four aspects. Self, which is about having a very strong mind, what I call a strong soul, which is having positive energy around you, and three is having a strong body, right? Self acts as the core of anything you do. If your self is weak, pretty much every other aspect of your life is going to get screwed, right? So your core work starts with having a strong sense of self, in terms of being able to have a strong and functioning mind, soul, and body. The second is service. And the reason why I put service ahead of even social is this entire framework is applicable for people who are about 20. And about 20, if you don't make your own money, you're probably, not in the going in the right direction, right? Which essentially means service becomes important, but service becomes important not just for money. It is also because you have to use the muscle of the mind to be able to move along and to be able to inspire, because one of the axes is to maximize on purpose. So service can be broken down into the skills you're gaining, into the career and the impact you're having, and the wealth you're gaining, right? I very explicitly call out wealth because money is important in the larger scheme of things to be able to maximize the way you live life. The third aspect is social, and it's obviously, just foundationally as a kid, you obviously start with social before you get into service and education. Social again has three aspects. One is, your romantic relationship. Pretty much everything that humans do is to get a very strong romantic partner. And, there's enough and more literature on how everything a human does in terms of self, in terms of job, is maximized towards that. Because at the end of the day, some of these are evolutionary physiological needs, but romance is an extremely important part of your social, success. Two is parenting, and this could be, in the case you have parents alive, it could be as a kid to the parents. If you have a kid of your own, it could be as a parent to the kid. But parenting, takes care of both of these aspects. The last part of social is, of course, a very strong community across friends and family, and how you're able to sort of sustain that and be a contributor to that. The last part is fun, which I call census. And census has again three aspects. One is to have a very strong lifestyle, a strong local lifestyle in terms of what you do in your weekend, what are the activities that you are part of, and what are the places that you visit in the weekend in your own city. It also includes a good quality of life in terms of a good setup at home, a good setup at work, and the foundational city you live in. Second is media. Of course, today we have access to a huge amount of content across movies, TV, music, sports, design, arts, and that's a big part of how you experience the world and how you experience the diversity of the world. Travel is the last aspect of senses and fun, which is how are you getting this entire diverse life, right? The idea with the 100-point life score, there are 100 questions covering these, four aspects. These four aspects are broken down, if you can see, across 12 sub aspects, and these 12 sub aspects contribute to 100 different points. For example, the mind has 10 different points, soul has 10 different points, lifestyle has 5 different points. So these 100 questions is how I gather your one life score. The idea with the one life score again is it's an individual score. It is not a relative score, right? If you are greater than 80, you're experiencing life to the fullest extent possible. If you are 60 to 80, you're probably weak on one aspect here, but you're experiencing life on the other three aspects in a strong way. If you're 40 to 60, maybe two aspects could be on the verge of being broken. If you're less than 40, so it's very similar to your pass marks versus a fail marks. But the good part with this is it's a very individual score. The idea is that you could be extremely content. You might be on a score of 40 for 45 here, but you might be extremely content and living happy, and that's very possible. The way the nature of this framework is to say, hey, if you come out of your cocoon, there's a lot to experience in this life and there's a lot to go shoot for. So one life theory as a framework is not applicable to those who want to live a contented life. It is not, right? It gives you a lot of this literature to say, hey, if you choose to live a contented life, that's phenomenal. It's going to take you effort, but you can do that. But the construct of one life theory, the way the logo is designed, the way this is to say that all of us have infinite potential. So the way the logo is designed is on those four aspects: green for self, blue for service, red for social, and yellow for senses. You can actually go towards living 120% life, right? And that's the whole point of one life theory, is to maximize your purpose, is to maximize your pleasures. And at any point in time, you are actually living a life where you're just kicked about that particular moment. So I'll pause here because I want to do the second poll, and I know we have only 2 minutes left, and so maybe it's going to take another 5-10 minutes. So if people can extend, I think that'll be great, because I would also love feedback at the last. This poll is to measure your, what I call, happiness index, because it's obviously a short time. I can't do the entire one life score in a session like this. So what I do is I actually measure what I call the happiness index. I'm going to put the link on the chat window. So just like you did on the last time, if you can answer this quick one, that will really help. Hansika's question on gender: to work towards achieving the one life, the unconditioning of any individual's brain is in itself a lifelong task, it looks like. Yes, it is. Do you think one life is not a destination, rather a journey? Actually, that is absolutely true. The reason why, point three of the 10 tenets becomes the crux of one life. I mean, if you look at one life, what it says is you maximize the love you have for the moment, a particular moment. And you will see steps 5, 6, and 7 as to how all the steps lead to the final step, which is to be in the moment every moment, right? which by inherent means that a particular moment, as I said, could be successful or failure, but all the collection of moments is your life, right? So which is why that's that is extremely important. Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's fine. Whoever wants to exit at 6, please do. It's going to take another 5 7 minutes. So for the others, I promise to end in the next 5 7 minutes. Uh, so let's see the responses. Okay, happiness index. Thanks. That's 16 responses. So a lot of you, which is good by the way, which means that this audience at least seems to be pretty clear. The last time I did this, the skew was slightly different. So 12 of you, 12 of the 16 are actually in 7 comma 8, which is great, right? Which essentially means that 80% of you are in 7 comma 8, right? Actually it's 13, so 80% of you are 7 comma 8, which is actually a pretty reasonable score. Two of you, and the whole point, you could be there, but maybe there is one aspect of life that if you fix, you actually could move into 9 comma 10. 13.5% are in 9 comma 10. Thankfully, only 6.5% is less than or equal to 6. There are zero people less than 4, which is a good, I don't think anyone's life touchwood is broken, which is good to hear. And the whole idea of this is to say, as humanity, as people who are entering life in a very different age, can we move the entire one life score of the audience today? If I go do a survey of the general public, maybe the one life score is somewhere in the 50s or 60s, or maybe in the 40, that's probably what an average would be, right? Can we move that closer and closer to 70s and 80s and start with, of course, people like me, and then expand to people beyond, like me, right? That's the purpose of sort of one life score. Which aspect of life are the most happiest about? Most people have said relationships. 50% have said relationships. Which aspect are you least happiest about? 40% have said health. So clearly, there's a trend line here to say that relationships is the happiest, and self or the health is the one that is the weakest. And it's sort of very consistent with an audience like this kind of responses, that relationships number one and health is the worst. Last 2 minutes of this particular session. Um, there's a question on how manage externalities, factors. I mean, if you can elaborate that question on the chat, that will help, Shamitra. Uh, okay, so let me project back the last slide before we wind down for the day. Okay, so steps 5, 6, and 7, right? So if you're able to get the one life score and at least understand as to where you're super strong and where you are not so strong, that's what the one life score will do, right? It will tell you exactly as to where, which is your weakest link and which is your strongest link. And if the weakest links are more than one or two, it will also show your aggregate score will be in the 50s, right? The moment you're able to do that, then you get to steps 5, 6, and 7. A chapter as defined, life is a, your life is a story, it has a variety of chapters, is to actually write out a particular chapter at a particular point in time to say, my next chapter, these are the particular areas of life, whether that's self, for example, if self is your most broken, you start with saying that for all the 40% for whom self is the most broken, you start with saying that this is the way I'm going to fix self. Self is so foundational that if for the 40% you have to work on that. So the next 25% for who had said work is the one that's most broken, there, that becomes the most foundational thing, right? In terms of having to take on as the biggest focus for that particular chapter. It could be for a particular part of the chapter. The way step 5 works is you actually list down what is your key outcomes for the next chapter of your life. A chapter could be 2 years, could be 3 years, could be 5 years, whatever you define as a chapter of in your life. And the most important part of the chapter is you write out a story in the form of a mini press article of 100 to 200 words on how, when you look back at the chapter 3 years out or 5 years out, how you would want that press article to be, right? And that's a very powerful way to visualize, right? In terms of how you want the next chapter to be. The moment you put some energy and write this out, it will actually tell you as to which are the aspects of life you want, in a way which can be absolutely magnified, which are the aspects of life which are less important to you, where continuing how you are is good enough. You do that, and then you get to step 6, because step 5 will give you the clear outcomes. It means that you have to act on some things, right? Setting the environment means that you have to take certain one time decisions. Let's say you're in a broken relationship. Let's say you are in a broken job, it's just not moving you towards your goals. Let's say you're in a location or a city which just you are not happy about. The moment you write out your chapter outcomes, and in your chapter outcomes you don't put any stress on any constraints, right? You then set the environment. Setting the environment includes putting in place the one time decisions you have to do, which might be moving locations, moving houses, changing a relationship, whatever it is, the tough ones. Some of these will be very difficult to do at one time. Then the processes, the systems, the tools that you're going to use to be able to monitor your life to get a higher and higher OneLife score. You literally can take the OneLife score. The moment you make these one time decisions, your OneLife score will automatically improve. That could be to join a gym if your health is broken, that could be to join a meditation class if your mental health is broken. Whatever it is are the one time interventions you do, but that's not enough, because you just do it 1 week or 1 day, that's not going to improve the OneLife score consistently. You then measure your OneLife score every quarter or every month end based on how broken it is, as you after you set the environment. And that's the step 7, which is quarterly plan to daily schedule, right? The whole idea of steps 5, 6, and 7 is to say you're clear of what your chapter is. That means that you have to set the environment around you, and then you have to now break it down into a quarterly plan, a weekly set of tasks, and a daily schedule. It is impossible to get to balance within a particular day. You can only expect balance in a particular week, which means that a week's time is what you can hope for balance. A week has 168 hours. There's a particular separate TED talk, TEDx talk that I have given, which talks about the week as sort of the instrument of time on which you should have balance. And if you start of the week, every week, if you're able to understand what your priorities are and how much time you're spending on which four aspects of life, right? Then you will be able to get to where you should be. For example, if you have 168 hours and you sleep, let's say 42 to 48 hours, right? You have 120 hours left. If you say, okay, I'm going to have the focus of this chapter of life is going to be work, and I'm going to spend 60 hours at work, how do you break down the 60 hours across customers, marketing, finance? All of that stuff is the next level detailing of that. And the other 60 hours on personal, I'm going to spend 20 hours in relationship, 20 hours in fun, 20 hours in health, right? I'm giving a very simplistic view of the whole of the week, but it's extremely possible to manage out your week with some level of predictability and schedule, and then narrow it down to how your daily schedule should look. You could be one of two types of people: someone who's extremely bored of routine, for whom the daily calendar just does not work, and they have to wake up and figure out what they want to do, their mood. Or you could be the other person for whom they have to have a daily calendar for the next 1 or 2 weeks, and they will only live by that, right? It doesn't matter. The idea here is not to say that one is better than the other, but the more the predictability you can for your daily schedule, the better it is. And at the end of all of this is to say that if you have come to step number 7 in a very logical way, you are living the best one life that you can, because you are making sure your health is of top order. You're making sure you're having fun in your relationships as well as your other senses, and you're doing something purposeful in life that moves you towards more every step, every week, every month, towards the right outer bound, right? The whole of the workshop is supposed to be doing that. So I'm going to send this feedback link later on email, because this is a slightly longer one. You can't fill this in 5, 7 minutes. And I would love for you to sort of fill this feedback link. This is going to ask what you were able to most relate to, what you could not relate to. The idea over the next quarter is to do this once every 2 weeks to make this better, so that Tara can, at the end of quarter 3, roll this out as a workshop for people. And the idea with this entire exercise is, if you're able to do a workshop with 6 to 8 of you in a session over 4 to 8 hours, which means 4 to 6 hours is next level steps of each of this, where each of you will have a booklet where you go into the next level, so that at the end of it, you have a clear plan across these 7 steps individually. And we do a half an hour session after that, which is a one-on-one session to go through your individual sort of, assessment. This is a one day that's worth for you to actually get to your one life plan, right? That's sort of the way we want to maximize this. We want to proceed with this, and the idea with this quarter is to sort of roll this out, and go to both companies as well as individuals, across social media, to be able to do this in a much more scalable way. So that's how One Life Theory will pan out the rest of this quarter and over the rest of the years. We'll also be doing a variety of content, and again, Tara has been anchoring a variety of content which we put out on Instagram, YouTube, and Medium. And the idea with this, of course, is this framework is elaborate enough that you can do a self assessment at any point in time. But we also hope to make sure that we do this in a way that we can seed and then roll these out as workshops and stuff, and sort of make this more national and then make this more international, right? Because this should be a movement towards moving to the outer bound extreme. This is not for everyone. People can choose to be in the center, but for that 80% who want to live their one life, I think this is absolutely worth it. In this audience, it might be 80%. In some other audience, it might be only 20%. I'll pause here. Anyone, wants to ask me any questions, I'm around for the next 5-10 minutes. Um, Someone, Soumitra, I have not elaborated your question. If you can elaborate the lab.
Yeah, Rajiv, I didn't want to interrupt your flow.
Why don't you just maybe shoot the question? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just first up, I mean, thanks a ton for taking through the framework, right? This puts a lot of things into perspective. Just wanted to know that, despite